Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody. Hands-on Apologetics. Yes, you have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and I am your host and sensei, Gary Michuta. Welcome aboard, folks. It's great to be back. I've been off a few days. I had a back-to-back debate with Steve Christie over the Deuterocanon on Tuesday and Wednesday. And by the way, you can check it out. I got the links embedded in my website, which is handsonapologetics.com. You can watch it there, or go on YouTube to Reason and Theology. You know, our good friends with Michael Lofton, William Albrecht, and Eric Ibarra. And you can check out the debate for yourself. I want to say thank you to all of you for keeping me in your prayers during the debate. It really did buoy me, and I'm sure the hand of God was on that. And God willing, through the debate, we'll be able to, defend the Word of God and bring people into the fullness of the faith in His church. And it's been really great. And, one thing I want to share before going to the debate, I got a text from the great Jesse Romero, giving me words of encouragement and assuring me of his prayers. And man, I felt like, there's a scene in 2 Maccabees at the very end, I think it's the 15th chapter, where Judas Maccabeus has this vision or dream where Jeremiah the prophet hands him a sword, to go and conquer. And I was reading his text, and I thought, wow, this is just like that, handing me the spiritual sword. So many thanks to Jesse. Many thanks to all of you for praying for me. And, check it out if you'd like, folks. Let's see. Boy, there's just so much because I've been gone a few days. I also want to give a shout-out to John from Santa Maria. And he sent an email that I wanted to address because this is actually kind of relevant. He said that he saw me on the Matt Fradd show talking about the Deuterocanon, which is Pints with Aquinas. Very, very good show. And he asked me the opinion of, he's on Fire Catholic. He's a regular listener to Hands-On Apologetics and the other programs at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And he's like, is Pints with Aquinas a good, solid Catholic show? And I say yes. Yes, it is. Now, it's not going to be like Virgin Most Powerful Radio where you get, straight talk and, gloves off type material. Because we're here to help equip you, give you the means, especially this show, to defend and share the faith. Matt Fradd is much more diplomatic. It's more of a velvet hammer approach, if you will. So he's solidly Catholic, but he interacts with non-Catholics, and of course, he's very polite and agrees with what we both mutually agree with, and he'll very tactfully point out disagreements. By the way, he's also going to be a guest here on Hands-On Apologetics. I believe it's going to be Tuesday, the 14th, if I recollect. So, John, thanks for the email. Appreciate it. And you ask what's coming up in the program. Well, guess what? We got an awesome show in store for you today. We have Catholic Bryan Mercier is coming into the dojo after the break. And we're going to continue our series on the Jehovah Witnesses. And we're going to talk specifically about false predictions and other teachings of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. That's going to be very cool, folks. And as always, we have a Finding the Fallacy. Today's Finding the Fallacy, by the way, is the Ad Hominem Fallacy. And we meet an early church father, and this early father is the last of the early church fathers, St. John Damascene. So got some great stuff in store for us. But, as always, we try to start out the program by stepping on the right foot. And that means our shout-outs and welcomes. So I want to welcome all of you watching live stream, Facebook, YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Yeah, I see lots of familiar names, some new names too. That's pretty cool. Welcome aboard, folks. By the way, all you newbies, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the program. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening live on radio around the United States and also via podcast around the world. And if you ask yourself, where do I get such podcast? Well, you go to our flagship website, which is at virginmostpowerfulradio.org. And just click on our shows, scroll down, and you get all the great shows that we've done. And, by the way, share it. Tell people about it. If you haven't subscribed to Hands on Apologetics on YouTube, please do. We totally appreciate it, and it helps Virgin Most Powerful in its ministry as well. Gets other people to know about it and kind of share the wealth. So a lot of new people, good numbers. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. It doesn't cost any money. And if you tell people about the program, you might be able to help somebody. Maybe, for example, you know somebody who is talking to Jehovah's Witnesses or is interested in what they believe or something like that. Well, this would be a great program to share with them. So go to Virgin Most Powerful Radio, click on the show. It'll be up in a day or so, and just share it with your friends. And we really appreciate it. All right, well, why don't we jump into the Finding the Fallacy segment? Every show, we look at an informal fallacy, and this helps us sharpen our critical thinking skills because, like in the debate, you have to be able to identify bad thinking. And so today's Finding the Fallacy is the ad hominem fallacy, which, of course, is a Latin term which means to the man. So what is ad hominem fallacy? Well, essentially what it is that it occurs when someone insults the arguer without addressing the argument. In other words, it attacks the person, hence the name to the man, as a way of avoiding or ignoring the argument at hand. So, for example, if you say Catholic doctrine X is true, and a non-Catholic says, "Oh yeah, well you're fat, you're stupid, and you're ignorant," that is a ad hominem fallacy, right? Because why? Well, because they're attacking you. They are not addressing the argument at hand. And that's really what the goal is, folks. It's arguments and evidence, right? It's being able to use reason, logic, scripture, and use those as means to open people up to God's grace. So what do you do when you're attacked or an ad hominem attack comes along? Well, I always do the same steps. Actually, Trent Horn recommends the exact same thing. First, you absorb it. And if you want, you could concede theoretically that they're true. And this takes a lot of the power out. Say, yeah, okay, and this is true. I am fat, and and let's say I'm stupid, and so on and so forth, or ignorant. Nevertheless, and then you refocus the argument, put it back on the argument. Even if what you say about me is true, nevertheless, what about what I said? And in a way, you can actually do a little slip move, too, and say, look, if I really am this ignorant and so on and so forth, then my argument should be able to prove false like that, right? It should be a piece of cake for a smarty who's, well-informed and thin as you, right? So absorb it and then refocus to the argument. And that is our Finding the Fallacy for today, the ad hominem fallacy. Let's go to the Meet the Early Church Father. Today's Early Church Father, St. John Damascene, also known as St. John of Damascus, also known as the Golden Speaker, also known as John Mercier. Mercier is the family name, meaning in Arabic, the victorious. And the Emperor Constantine V. Copromos, who reigned from AD 741 to 775, was incensed at John's anti-iconoclastic writings. And in other words, he supported the veneration of images. Iconoclasm's the denial of the use of images. It says, Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers says, but put a slightly different inflection on his last name, where he called him John Mercier, which meant bastard John. One might have expected that a man named Corpomius, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, would have been a bit more careful about playing the fool with people's names, seeing that his name was recalling an infantile indiscretion of having soiled the font of his baptism. So anyway, the background of John is that the Merciers, John's grandfather and father before him, occupied ministerial offices in Damascus, first under the Byzantine rulers, and then after 636 A.D., under the Arab rulers of the city. John was educated by a certain Cosmas, presumably a ransomed Sicilian captive, who was probably also John's adopted brother. And he had thorough knowledge of Arabic and Greek and was proficient also in the knowledge of Muslim religion. He himself served the caliph's government for a time and enjoyed a position of trust, but hostility towards Christianity displayed by the Caliph Abd al-Malik was such that around the year 700 A.D., John resigned his civil office along with Cosmas, who afterwards became the bishop of Mayama near Gaza and became a monk at Marib Saba. There, John was ordained as patriarch, ordained by the patriarch John V of Jerusalem, and sometime prior to the outbreak of the controversy over iconoclasm. In that controversy, John was decidedly anti-iconoclastic and could safely speak his mind because he was physically removed from the sphere of influence of the emperor and the Byzantine court. John's theology was orthodox and his Christology was quite Chalcedonian. And that's our early church father for today, St. John Damascene. Coming up on the other side of the break, we have Catholic Bryan Mercier. We're going to be talking about Jehovah Witnesses and false predictions. Stay tuned.
Genesis 1:27 says, God created man in his own image. Male and female he created them. According to Pope St. John the 23rd, it is not true that some human beings are by nature superior and others inferior. All human beings are equal in their natural dignity. May God help us to look upon everyone as a person created in his image and likeness, and treat everyone the same without favoritism or prejudice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome, everybody, Hands on Apologetics. And, thank you, everybody, for your prayers for the debate. I did a back-to-back debate yesterday and the day before on the Deuterocanon. And just want to thank everyone again for your prayers. I noticed in the chat room a couple people asked how it went. I think it went very well. But you know what? God can use unworthy instruments like me to possibly bring about a greater good. And one of my favorite quotes from the saints, I always think about this. I'm going to share it with you because maybe it will help you as well. But St. John Vianney, the Curie of Ars, had a really, really tough time learning Latin. And he struggled. It struggled because he had to learn Latin in order to be ordained. And finally, the person who was... what do I want to say, was testing him for this, just threw his arms up and he said, "John, give me one good reason why I should allow you to be ordained." And John pulls out a quote. He says, if the Lord can slay 3,000 men with Samson, killing them with a jawbone of an ass, imagine what he could do with the whole thing. And I love that quote. And I quote it because, it was on EWTN, so I know it was proper to use that language. But, even the likes of you and me, folks, we can have a big impact on people. We just got to trust God. And so, not only thank you for your prayers during the debate, but also, keep the program in your prayers, keep those who will watch the debate in your prayers, that God will give the grace that eventually, that they can open their eyes so that they can embrace this incredible portion of sacred scripture. These 7 Old Testament books that Catholics and Orthodox accept, but Protestant and Jewish people don't. And it's too bad because this is so important. And anyway, talk about so important. It's also really important for us to understand the people we talk to, and that includes people who would knock at your door, at least before the COVID crisis, like the Jehovah Witnesses. So, to help us work through a lot of their very peculiar beliefs, we have our good friend Catholic Bryan Mercier on. Bryan Mercier, of course, is a professional Catholic speaker, a retreat leader, an author. He's a Catholic apologist. He's spoken at countless teen and adult events over 20 years, such as confirmation retreats, parish missions, and so on. He's appeared on EWTN and also national television, radio around in different states. And Bryan Mercier, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Thank you so much. Always glad to be here.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic to have you back on the show. I kind of missed you because, there's a little bit of lapse since the last time you were on, but we had a great discussion about Jehovah Witnesses.
Yeah, I always enjoy talking about Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, it's one of those groups that I think a lot of Catholics have always run into. They knock at your door, they leave magazines and so on. But we don't really have a clue about who they are or what they believe.
Yeah, and if you remember from our first show, in case you have any new listeners, it was the Jehovah's Witnesses have a very special place in my heart. And I say that because they're the ones who challenged me on my faith and almost made me lose my faith. But in fact, I went out and searched my faith and actually became a much stronger Catholic. Like you just said, so many Catholics just don't know what they believe. So every time Jehovah's Witnesses come to our door and say things, we often don't know what to say. And I wouldn't say the majority, but a large number of Jehovah's Witnesses are actually ex-Catholics because we just get sold what sounds to be like a biblical religion, and if you don't know your religion, you can easily be duped by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Which is why we're doing this show today and last time.
Yeah, and I believe last time we actually looked at the history of how this group was formed, and part of that history, in fact, their great growth was really because they claim to have their finger on the pulse of God's prophetic time table for the end times. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. For anyone who missed that episode, The Jehovah's Witnesses are actually an offshoot of the religion known as the Adventists, not to be confused with the Seventh-day Adventists. And the Adventists were run by William Miller, who tried to predict the end of the world. And, of course, he failed miserably, and the whole religion broke apart into sects. One of the sects was the Seventh-day Adventists, and another one became the Jehovah's Witnesses. And Charles Taz Russell, who's the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, continued to try to predict the end of the world. And he continued to say, even though the Bible says you do not know the day or the time or the hour that it's going to happen, he continued to try to say the day and the hour that it was going to happen. And Jehovah's Witnesses have historically, since the 1800s, tried to predict the end of the world and have failed. Now, this is very interesting. We're going to go through some of these, Gary, but it's very interesting that Deuteronomy 18:20-22 says that if you predict something to happen in the name of God and it doesn't happen, then you're a false prophet. And why should we listen to you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so there actually is a kind of a biblical test case that even they would accept, I believe, to determine whether or not the group they belong to did do false prophecy and were false prophets.
Exactly. And every time I speak with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's very hard to convince them that their doctrines are wrong, which is why I try to focus on the fact that they've been lied to and misled by the Watchtower Society, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, because I said these men have predicted the world will happen so many times and have failed, not once, not twice, not even 5 times, but many times, and they've failed. What is that saying about the religion of the Jehovah's Witnesses? What is that saying about their credibility? And if they can get it wrong so many times in this area, how do we know that they haven't got it wrong in all of these other areas as well?
Right. Now, you've had a lot of field experience, and that's what I love about you. You've been in the trenches. In your experience, when you're sharing this information with them, are they aware of these false predictions?
Well, they're not aware of it to the magnitude and the amount of times that the Jehovah's Witnesses have predicted and failed, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But many of them are familiar with the dates of 1914, which was the big one, 1925, and even 1975, because some Jehovah's Witnesses today are still alive when that prediction was made and failed. And in fact, as we're going to see when we get to it, the prediction in 1975 caused hundreds of thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses to leave the Watchtower and to leave that religion forever. But what they'll usually say is, oh, well, some people thought that the world was going to end, but, they misunderstood or they were mistaken. Oh, some people had opinions that the world was going to end, but, it was never said definitively. And that's all the line slack that I need, because the Watchtower has definitively said that the dates are going to be this, and it's going to end. And they were very blunt about it. And starting in 1873, they started trying to predict that Christ was going to come back. He didn't, and so they said 1874, he will come back, and he didn't, and so they said 1876. So they just kept revising the timeline. And eventually they said, well, Christ started his reign, his invisible reign, in 1874. So he did come back in 1874 like we thought he would, but it was invisible. And they continued to do this until they realized that they messed up the timeline, and so they had to revise it. And the big revision came with 1914. That was the date. And in fact, I have books here, even right in front of me, that talk about, and these are the Watchtowers themselves. They're copies of the Watchtowers. And in the January 15th, 1892 edition, it says the date of the close of the Battle of Armageddon is definitely marked in Scripture as October 1914. It is already in progress, and the date has already began since 1874. So they've been saying since about 1876 onward, this in different watchtowers in the late 1800s that 1914 was going to be the end of the world. They had been preaching it for decades and decades. They said that it was going to commence with the Battle of Armageddon. And in fact, Gary, I have a Jehovah's Witness watchtower here, which is very interesting because they say that the Protestants are supporting and sympathizing with the Catholics, who is the great mother harlot church. And that Church of Rome, which is going to be condemned and destroyed by God at the end of time, the Protestants are joining them. So they paint this picture in the late 1800s of the Protestants and the Catholics and all the false religions joining together as a one world organization. And then Jesus, who's going to come down with all the armies of heaven who are brooding, and they're going to have this massive cataclysmic battle at Armageddon in which all of the world's systems and orders are going to be destroyed, including Protestantism, which are false churches, and Catholicism, which is the mother of all false churches. And that's all going to start in 1914. And in fact, if you read the watchtowers from 1914 and right before that, they say that the World War I is the beginning of Armageddon. Yeah. It was the precursor. Right. It was like Armageddon, World War I started, and what World War I started was going to commence and finish with the Battle of Armageddon, and that would be the end of the world.
Yeah, very good. And yeah, so it isn't like, well, it could be this date. It seems like it's likely. It's more like this is definitive biblical proof. Bible chronology can't lie. This is when Armageddon is going to happen. In fact, it's already started. So if someone tries to brush it off, Bryan, as saying, well, this was just speculative, they weren't really making truth claims, what would you say to them?
Well, I happen to have the watchtowers here, so I would point it out to them and that, the date is October of 1914. And I was like, that is what your church said. So, and then after that, they changed that. I mean, how can your church say for years that it's going to start with 1914 and it's going to be the end of the world? And the watchtowers used to say that the heavenly armies were preparing for battle and were ready to come down. I mean, everything was pointing to 1914. So how could you say here's what I would say to them, Gary. How could you say that it was just some people's opinions when it came from your watchtower? This was an official, I wouldn't say it's an official doctrine, right, but it came from the head people who were running your church. It was in your magazines, it was in your books, and it wasn't just some people's opinions. So, I really hold them to that and ask them what they think about that. And if the church could be wrong in that area, why can't they be wrong in other areas? Because they changed their mind. After the world didn't end in 1914, they said, I'll come back.
Very good. Well, I hear the music, Bryan. We're chatting with Captain Bryan Mercier about Jehovah's Witnesses and false predictions. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin's Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Bryan Mercier about Jehovah Witness predictions. And Bryan, just to clarify, for the audience, because it's kind of, the chronology is a little strange, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Millerites originally predicted the end of the world, I think it was 1843, 44. And then Jesus didn't come. A lot of people left the movement, but some stayed and they said, well, actually what happened was Jesus invisibly entered the Holy of Holies in heaven. So there's this thing like when it fails, then it's all invisible. And then some Adventists said, well, no, we know for a fact 1874 is going to be the date Jesus comes. That's going to be Armageddon. He doesn't show up. And then it says, well, he did show up, but it was invisible presence. And then it's a question, well, Armageddon would have to be 1914 then. And then, like you said, 1914 comes, World War I happens, Jehovah Witnesses are saying this is the beginning of Armageddon. So the big question, Bryan, is, was 1914 Armageddon?
Well, I'm still here. But they will say that he came back invisibly in 1914 and he started his reign in 1914. Again, they changed the date from 1874 to 1914, even though the Bible clearly says in Acts 1:11 that just as Jesus ascended up into heaven, so he's going to come back down the same way he came. And the Jehovah's Witnesses say, no, Jesus is not going to have a second coming. His second coming already happened in 1914 invisibly. So all the Christian churches are mistaken that he's going to come back visibly, Gary.
Yeah. So then it's just a question of, okay, well, if he came back invisibly in 1914, which, is biblically certain, and they're so clear on that, even though they originally said it was Armageddon, then it's just a question of figuring out, well, how much longer before the end comes, right?
Correct. And they did. It wasn't long until they revised it to 1915. That didn't happen, and so they revised it to 1918. And before 1918 even came, Charles Taz Russell had died, and other people who had taken over the organization took over the predictions as well. And in fact, there was one prediction which says that God will destroy wholesale and people in the church by the millions and millions. Even all of the republics will disappear in the fall of 1920. So they also predicted it to happen in 1920, but eventually the next big date after 1914 was 1925. And there was a Watchtower, there was a book, it's called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. I'm sure you've read it, Gary, but it says we can confidently expect that 1925 will mark the return of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the faithful prophets to the perfection of the human condition. And this was in 1918 they were saying this, even though they were also saying it would happen in 1920. But there have been a lot of contradictions in the Watchtower literature, which is a large problem to begin with. And 1925 was supposed to be the big date when everything ends. And for people who don't know the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe, as we spoke on last time, that everyone's going to go to heaven. They believe only 144,000 people go to heaven, and most of the people who have ever lived will come back down to earth, and that includes Moses, Abraham, Isaac, and people like that, although you figure that they would be one of the 144,000 if anybody is. But They're actually coming back down to earth to live on earth forever with the rest of us. And this was known as a jubilee. And in fact, in 1923, they said that the date of 1925 is even more fixed and has even more of a promise than Noah had. It's even more certain than the promise that God gave to Noah, and it's going to come to pass. And that's interesting.
Yeah, not to say the least. Now, wasn't there a building project that was associated with 1925?
Exactly. I was actually going to mention that.
Good.
The Judge Rutherford, who was the head of the Jehovah's Witnesses at the time, he was so certain that the world was going to come to an end shortly after 1925, or in 1925, depending on which prophecy you look at. But he was so certain it was going to happen that he actually built a house called Beth Siram. And this house means, it means house of princes. And he said that Moses and Isaac and Adam and all of these prophets of old are going to come back down and live on earth. And so he built them this glorious mansion with all of the latest amenities, as if they care about any of that. And they're going to live in this house of princes that he built for them. And Rutherford himself specifically said that this, let me just back up for a second, Gary. People were making fun of the Jehovah's Witnesses at this time. They were being ridiculed because they kept predicting the end of the world and failing. But Rutherford took it a step further. He put in all his chips, and he said this house is going to be proof that the end is near, that all of the prophets of old are going to return, and the culmination of everything is at hand. And, of course, 1925 came and passed, and even though they said the date was definitively settled by Scripture, the date didn't come, and people were still around, and people ridiculed him, and people ridiculed the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that is when they started the rumor of, some people said, or some people had hoped for, some people had surmised that it might happen, and they started to kind of backtrack on what they had said.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is, around the Depression era, right? I mean, so you have Jehovah's Witnesses donating money to build this mansion in California, which is kind of an odd place for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to live, Although California is a very nice place, it's not exactly the Middle East, right?
I know. It's so funny. Tim Staples once said that if you read the Quran, it's very much written in the way that Islam understands the world, because God would sit on couches, and God had she-camels, and he had all of these things that the Middle Easterners would know. And it's interesting that, Rutherford was writing as an American, from an American point of view, and interpreting things through American eyes, and as if people would want to live in California or Nebraska or anything. And as we talked about last week, Gary, why would you even want to come back down to a paradise on earth? Why would you want to live with God in heaven? What are amenities in a mansion going to do? I mean, we'll probably get tired of those after 50 years, 100 years. We're going to be like, next. But with God, we have eternal happiness in the beatific vision.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I never really considered that is odd that you would think of all people, those people would be up with 144,000 with Jehovah God, right? I mean, why would they be in the people with the earthly hope? Very strange.
Seriously, I mean, if Abraham's not getting chosen, and Moses isn't getting chosen, and some of God's greatest people in history who's surpassing them, and how did these guys get the chip?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they reach out, they put their chips down on 1925. 1925 comes and goes. And then they start kind of blaming, certain people in the organization, not the organization that, they got a little, they were hyperventilating, they were reading things in the Scripture, and we need to move on. So where did they move on to?
Well, let me read a quote real quick from 1931. It says, "There was a measure of disappointment on the part of Jehovah's faithful ones on the earth concerning the dates of 1914, 1918, and 1925. And they learned to quit fixing dates for the future and predicting what would come to pass at a certain date. Now, so apparently they learned their lesson for predicting dates, even though they continued to do so. But the next big date that they were going to predict was 1975. 1975 was supposed to be a big one, and we're talking modern day, Gary. Like I was born in 1974, so I mean, people who were older than me were all living during, like my parents were living during that false prediction of the end of the world. And at this time in 1974, and even the Watchtower magazines themselves, the Jehovah's Witnesses were saying that Armageddon is already taking place. And they were saying that witnesses would be seen around the world quitting their jobs, selling their homes, selling their property, and living out their days basically with nothing. They were ready to leave this earth. And when 1975 came around and none of that came to pass, and they had sold everything they had following a false organization like the Watchtower, I mean, many people were disillusioned. I mean, they say disillusion happens a year after marriage. No disillusion happens as much as in 1975 when they sold everything and nothing came to pass. And I mean, you can't make fun of the Jehovah's Witnesses. You can't belittle them. You have to feel bad for them. And you have to feel bad for the people who get caught up in cults like this. They are sincere. They sincerely believe they're trying to follow Jesus. They sincerely believe that they're doing the best they can and they're going to be saved, but they've been sincerely deceived. And that is truly something that needs our compassion, that these people are following a false religion and being duped by people who rule over them, the Watchtower governing body, and are leading them astray. I mean, it's tragic.
Yeah. Actually, I'm old enough to remember that period, and there was a slogan, "Stay alive till 75," that was around, and with the expectation that 75 was it. But I really appreciate your presentation, because this explains, folks, why for Jehovah's Witnesses they're always living in a state of suspense, because they believe, or at least they used to believe, I'm not sure if they still do, that Jesus came invisibly in 1914. So it's any time, any minute, Armageddon and everything will be will be destroyed in Armageddon. And so,
right.
Those who stake their lives and fortunes behind those predictions, they just get wiped out, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And many other ones are put in their place, which is why they keep revising their timeline. And some people, some really, really high up people in the church at that time left the Jehovah's Witnesses, including, I believe, the son of the president. But a man named Carl Johnson.
Well, actually, hold that thought, Bryan. I hear the music coming up. We're chatting with Catholic Bryan Mercier about Jehovah's Witness predictions. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Help the Helpless, a Minnesota St. Paul nonprofit organization chaired by Father of Tyr and volunteers, is humbly asking you for your kind support to help the poor and the handicapped children in India and Ecuador. Through financial support from the Help of the Helpless benefactors, the children are provided with clothing, food, education, shelter, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. The mission is to help children thrive and become self-sufficient young adults leading productive lives. We also provide aid to poor families in Ecuador with food baskets, medicines, medical assistance, and help with funeral needs for the deceased. The work in India is done by Father Antonio's organization, St. Mary's. In Ecuador, the work is being done by the Servant Sisters of the Home of Mother. You can call us at 877-762-8857. To learn more, please visit our website, www.helpthehelpless.org. God bless you.
Healthcare news today seems to be coming from everywhere and everyone. It's confusing at least and untrustworthy at the worst. Dr. Aceta is a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community. He is trustworthy, well-researched, and will only give expert opinion on matters in his own specialty. Catholic teaching at its entirety is of utmost importance to Dr. Aceta. Give Dr. Aceta a call for your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-695-6617.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Bryan Mercier about Jehovah Witnesses and their false predictions. And if you missed it, you want to listen to the last couple segments because Bryan's given a clinic on all the different predictions that were made, false predictions, obviously. And we were just talking about 1975. And Bryan, after the failure of 1975, it was devastating for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. In fact, you were just going to tell us about this great spat of apostasy that occurred within the organization.
Yes, exactly. Many people had left the Watchtower forever. Hundreds of thousands of people left and never came back. I mean, rightly so. And many people from the top down even left. Some of the highest people in the church had left. And in fact, the son of the president of the organization at the time wrote like a 350-page book after he left about all of the problems with the Watchtower. And I know a man who worked in the research department for 12 years at the Watchtower and could not substantiate the claims or the timeline of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And in fact, he found the opposite because there was a man, I believe, don't quote me, but I believe he was in Sweden, and his name is Carl Johnson. And he also wrote a 350-page book explaining why and how the timeline that the Jehovah's Witnesses used to predict the end of the world in 1914 and then 15, 18, 20, 25 was wrong. I mean, I don't think after so many false predictions, you need a huge book to show how their timeline's wrong. But he goes into great detail, taking the passages that they use from Scripture and showing how they're wrong on that matter. And it's very, very interesting. It's called The Gentile Times Reconsidered, if anyone out there is interested.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very important book. In fact, you're not on Skype, so I had a copy of this, Crisis of Conscience by Raymond France. He was the former member of the governing body of Jehovah Witnesses. That's another very good book because he explains how the governing body works and their deliberations and how he came to realize that it was a false organization as well.
Absolutely. I mean, he was one of the highest members in the church, and he really goes and he tears it apart page by page. And I honestly don't know how any Jehovah's Witnesses could really refute it. I mean, a lot of the facts are pretty solid. And a lot of the calling out of the witnesses and their false prophecies are pretty solid. The contradictions that the Jehovah's Witnesses have made so many times. I mean, listen to this, Gary. I mean, this is coming from the Watchtower themselves after 1975. They actually said this. They said, there have been many false prophets in our day, but they are prophets of financial, political, and clerical procrastinators. They assume to foretell future events, but their dreams and guesses never come true. Therefore, they are false prophets, and the people should no longer trust them as safe guides. And then in another part of their Awake magazine, they say that the Watchtower has actually predicted the end of the world, even giving a specific date, but the end did not come. And they even say they were guilty of false prophecy. So they were condemning, Gary, these other people, organizations, prophets, and even some other religions who didn't predict the end of the world correctly or made prophecies or I guess in other areas too, but they didn't come to pass. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses were quick to point out that they predicted something to happen in the name of God, and it didn't. And so therefore they're false prophets. And they were guilty, they said, of false prophesying. Now, if that is not calling the kettle black, how can you say that other people are false prophets, and yet you yourself have 10 to 1 failed to predict the end of the world and so many times, and they can't even see it. So these are the things, when I discuss with Jehovah's Witnesses, these are the things that I point out to them. And many Jehovah's Witnesses really think about it. I mean, they'll try to say, oh, well, that's just their opinion. I'll say, no, it's the Watchtower saying this. So what do you have to say about that? And they really don't know what to say. I mean, they get visibly uncomfortable and don't really know how to answer it, but you have to hold them to these things if you're ever going to make them think for themselves and hopefully leave the organization for true Christianity.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And also, you know, the enormous damage that was done. I have a book called Children that was printed, I think, in the 1940s by Watchtower. And they were urging their members, don't start up families, don't have children, because Armageddon's just around the corner, and you want to dedicate your whole life to, you know, whatever you have to spreading the word about Armageddon being so near. But, you know, those people in the 40s, they never had children, you know, and, you know, they suffered enormously because of the false prophecy. It isn't just like, well, these are nice factoids. I mean, it really did destroy some people who honestly, you know, believed their teaching and had faith in the governing body.
And that's tragic to me. I mean, I think that's why the book of Revelation says that Jesus, you know, hates false religion, because it hurts people. He doesn't hate the people in the religion, but he hates the religion itself because it leads people away from him. It hurts them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And anyone who knows Jehovah's Witnesses who have left, they usually need years of counseling and healing to just get to a place where they feel at peace, because there's so much abuse mentally and spiritually, so much guilt that Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults too, of course, have to go through and endure. It takes them years to heal. And in fact, one of my friends who's a Jehovah's Witness convert talks to Jehovah's Witnesses and brings them out. And they're so distrustful of anything and everything because the Jehovah's Witnesses had lied to them their whole life that they're the only true religion and everyone else is from Satan. Protestants are from Satan. Catholics from Satan. They're all working together. They're all going to be destroyed in Armageddon. Now imagine leaving that religion and hearing that everything else is evil. Like, where do you go? A lot of these people are very confused. And needless to say, thankfully, there's a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witness forums nowadays and groups that are very helpful in helping these people.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm familiar on YouTube. There's dozens of channels of former Jehovah's Witnesses who are now atheists because they grew up thinking that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is the only true, authentic Christian religion, and then you know, something happens where they see all these false predictions and so on, and they just they forsake all of Christianity. In fact, some of them even forsake belief in God.
Absolutely. And if you remember our 3 shows that we did on Mormons, I said the majority of Mormon missionaries also went into either atheism or agnosticism after their missions, because they also were so sold on the idea that Mormonism is true that when they find out that it might not be, or if they have doubts about it, they don't think anything's right. No religion can be right if Mormons aren't right. And it takes them a long time to say, kind of like atheists. Atheists will say, well, all the gods of the past aren't true, therefore the God of the Christians isn't true either. But that's a false conclusion. And it's also a false conclusion that just because your church is wrong, that all others are as well.
Yeah. Very well put. Very well put. The one thing that really strikes me about the Watchtower, and I'd like to hear your opinion too, is because it is so authoritarian that I found that when Jehovah Witnesses finally are able to break free from the beliefs of the Watchtower, when they look at the church that's legitimately has authority, like the Catholic Church, they kind of bristle because they kind of associate any kind of authoritative structure, even the authentic one, as being bad or evil or deceiving or whatever.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree, because they say, well, how do I know? If you get into an abusive relationship with a guy, if you're a woman, and you get out of that after years, and then you're going to be afraid to date again. Even if you find a guy who's, maybe has a certain temperament, it doesn't mean he's that way at all. And it's the same thing with Jehovah's Witnesses, with Mormons. They can either take two paths. One, they don't trust anybody, or they hold on to their rigidity. And I know several Jehovah's Witnesses who joined the Catholic Church but then became like sedevacantists, because their rigidity and their, everything has to be true down to the very letter of the law. It even leads them astray within Catholicism to go down to sects like sedevacantism. And it's really sad, because what it really comes down to, and what my friend always tells them, he's an expert on Jehovah's Witnesses, he always says it comes down to the authority that Jesus gave. And authority doesn't deceive. You won't see false prophecies from the Catholic Church. You won't see false claims that the Catholic Church has made that has been disproved time and time again. You will see that the Catholic Church has consistently taught what she has, her doctrines and dogmas, for the last 2,000 years. And that, for him and for all of us, is the proof in the pudding that Jesus has truly guided his church for 2,000 years. If your church was started in 1879, it's not the Church of Jesus. If it was started in 1517, it was not the Church of Jesus. If it was started in 1914, it's not the Church of Jesus. Jesus' church, true church, was started with Jesus 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, very good. Well, we have about a minute left. I want to ask you, what have you been up to, with all your projects on YouTube and so on?
Well, I've been recording a lot of YouTube videos for Catholic Truth. We have a ton of videos on different religions, apologetics, spirituality, and I'm actually going to be putting up a new one today on Mormons. So if people are interested in that, they can check out our YouTube channel at Catholic Truth. I also started an online confirmation retreat as an option, just in case Corona keeps people from meeting in person. We wanted to give them an option to have an online retreat as well.
Very good. Well, Bryan, it's always information-packed and also enthusiasm-packed as well, having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. It's Bryan Mercier, everybody. Check out his stuff on YouTube. Lots of great info. And, man, the hour has flown. It's already time to turn down the Midwest Command Center and turn off the dojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. And, God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing we call Hands-On Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.